From all three coasts, Canadians are praising Rick Hillier as a transformational leader who restored the morale of the Canadian forces and, not incidentally, also their equipment by the billions. Well, to look at the Hillier legacy, we're joined in Winnipeg today by former General Lou MacKenzie, who was something of a hero of himself after commanding the UN in Sarajevo, and by Steve Staples of the Rideau Institute. Well, the first question's easy, not that easy probably. Mr. MacKenzie, what was the legacy in your view of Rick Hillier? What is it?
Well, Craig, I'm going to show my bias for the soldiers because I really do think what you mentioned in the intro, reestablishing the morale, high morale of the Canadian forces in general and the Army in particular. No easy thing to do. Little easier to do when you're in the field all the time, but when you combine field experience with playing the game inside the Ottawa city limits, I don't think anybody in my lifetime has played both games better than Rick Hillier.
Mr. Staples?
Well, I think that he has brought in a transformation of the military, Craig, as you said, into kind of a military that most Canadians wouldn't even recognize anymore. It's a military that has a lot more heavy equipment, is much more on a combat-oriented war footing. It's much better able to fight alongside the United States. It seems to be embracing those kinds of military campaigns. And today, peacekeeping is perhaps a dirty word in the lexicon right now. He really has transformed the military for better or for worse.
Lou MacKenzie, was he too strong for his own good? And by that I mean he was such a powerfully charismatic figure, so persuasive, captured Canadians, that it has been the Defense Department which really has been driving the whole war in Afghanistan, not the Foreign Affairs Department, not the Prime Minister's office, not the bureaucrats, but Rick Hillier and people in uniform. And doesn't that basically distort the system, maybe even quite a bit?
Yeah, maybe it does, Craig, but it's not the military's fault. He did that by default. I mean, starting with Bill Graham, who had the cojones to appoint Rick Hillier as the CDS and put an operator in there. Bill Graham and his successors went across the country to brief the Canadian public on the potential dangers of the mission and give them a heads up. The problem is, when they held a press conference, not many people showed up. A couple of your colleagues in the front row, and that was about it. When Rick Hillier showed up, standing room only, and so by default, he became the seller of the mission, which is totally and absolutely wrong, because it shouldn't be, as you pointed out, a military responsibility. But you've got a CDS for the first time since General Dextras back in the mid-70s, a Korean and World War II vet, that was doing what he's paid for, provide unfettered military advice to the government. And if the government doesn't like that advice, they can ignore it, or they can fire him. But the fact is, previous CDSs, good people, except for one that had to be fired over the Somalia affair, good people who had to understand the Ottawa game. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a military today. We'd have a constabulary with 9mm pistols and blue berets running around the world where that type of work doesn't exist anymore.
So, Mr. Staples, I guess where this leads is to the political weakness of the rest of the system that allowed a Rick Hillier to just command the whole operation. And can you blame the Prime Minister if he was obviously having a very hard time with this guy who was more important to Canadians than he was?
Well, absolutely, and I think one of the legacies of Rick Hillier is the relationship that the military has with the media now, Craig. I mean, people loved Rick Hillier. He was able to give those quotes. The journalists really wanted to attend those conferences, so that everybody loved him, really, because everyone was afraid not to. I mean, you really couldn't, if anyone brought up any critique of this, then there was a rallying chorus around him. And I think, really, General Hillier will go out on a real high, but historians will look at his legacy a little bit differently down the road, and I think the record will be more mixed.
Okay, on the subject,
this is so Canadian, Craig, that we complain about somebody because he's too good. Only Canadians.
Well,
only Canadians do that.
I'm going to do more of that now, because on the subject of political weakness, let's look at Max Bernier and why Foreign Affairs didn't seem to have very much control over what was said or done in Afghanistan. And you have to wonder about Mr. Bernier's remark, for instance, when he was in Afghanistan. How bad was that?
Well, it was the biggest cock-up diplomatically in my lifetime, that's for sure. I almost drove off the road when I heard it being reported over the radio. I mean, I just came back from Afghanistan a couple of weeks ago. All the effort, all the negotiations, all the working together with the governor of Kandahar, creating a number of projects, particularly out of the provincial reconstruction team, you know, was impacted by this comment. Not only that, if the governor is corrupt, if that is the case, then the last thing President Karzai can do is fire him if it came as a suggestion from a Canadian government official. So it's a lose-lose in both areas. I don't know, maybe he got the confidential briefing notes mixed up with his talking points, but it was really quite an unforgivable error.
Mr. Staples, you want to comment on our foreign minister and how well he's doing?
Well, let me just say first, Craig, when the time is right and if circumstances require it, myself, I'm not opposed to a little public diplomacy that he seemed to be venturing out on. But I don't think that was the game plan. I think he did make a mistake, and he was brought in really in terms of bolstering support for the war in Quebec by Prime Minister Harper, but he's really turned out to be very light. He was completely absent on the RadarSat issue, where he had clear responsibility. He's refused to meet with parliamentarians over the sale of that satellite to the United States, and now I think the opposition parties are sensing that it's time for a change. And as we talked about earlier, Foreign Affairs, I think, has been without strong leadership for quite a while, and we can't afford to continue to have such as this going on. We need strong leadership in the Department of Foreign Affairs more than ever today.
Steve Staples of the Rideau Institute, former General, well, Star General, really, Lou MacKenzie. Thank you both for all your time this Sunday afternoon.
Cheers, Craig.
Thank you, Craig.